Man, this song sounds pretty good. Oh wait, FL Studio is in the way. What you just heard is what we're going to be making in this video. I have found a pretty consistent way of making FNF Chromatics work in any DAW, as long as they support one of the major third-party virtual instrument formats, like VST or AU, which happens to be most of them. And the best part is, this is mostly free. One of the major parts of this tutorial relies on Reaper, but everything else can be done completely for free. To prove that I'm not lying, here's the same chromatic working in FL, and again in Reaper, and yet again in Ableton. And you get the picture. Here is what you need. You will need a way to tune your samples. I'm using FL Studio, Melodyne, and Newtone, but you can use any means you see fit. Some mixing effects, like compression, EQ, and a limiter. Chances are your DAW has some pretty good stock mixing plugins, but we can do even better. Grab both the UAD Explore Bundle and the Kilohearts Essentials Bundle for free, as well as OTT if you don't have it already. Reaper. This is what we're going to use in order to loop and export the individual samples so they can actually be used. You'll also need to download the free SWS Extension for Reaper. It has some commands that we'll need to run a few times. I will leave links to it and a guide on how to install it in the description. Decent Sampler. This is the plugin that makes this both not only possible, but accessible to everyone. I've also created a Chromatic Template that you can download for free. It will cut out a lot of the repetitive boilerplate that you need to do for all chromatics anyway. There's also a markdown file which contains a bunch of code snippets which will speed up the workflow even more. I've also included the full chromatic we're making today as an example for you to study off of. Spreadsheet software. This isn't necessary per se, but will exponentially speed up the workflow. A code editor. Chances are if you've even remotely tried to make an FNF mod before, you already have VS Code installed. I'm using VS Codium personally, which is a fork of VS Code that removes all the Microsoft bloat. This is what we need to make the decent sampler file. And finally, some image editing software. I recommend Affinity because it's both free and actually feels nice to use. And of course, for a chromatic, you're going to need some vocals to turn into one. For this tutorial, I'm going to be using my character Mercy. She's perfect for this because of her multiple forms and to showcase how you can break down effects. Once you have your samples, import them into your DAW of choice and set the tempo to 80 BPM for now. Next, line up your samples on different tracks. Be sure to trim out the silence so you just have the samples. Now we're going to tune and stretch the samples. I have this really weird hybrid approach to how I do it. I stretch the samples in Melodyne, but I tune the samples in Newtone because I prefer how it processes the samples. Also, Melodyne has this weird habit of giving tuned samples really rubbery transient clicks that I don't really like. If you want an example of what they sound like, listen to Midnight from vs. Orpal Guy. When stretching the samples, make sure it goes up to a little before the end of the bar so there's some silence between the samples. This will help when chopping and looping the samples later. Then, copy and paste the sample across the full range. I like to keep my chromatics to 36 notes since that's a bit more than a human vocal range, which will give us some leeway with melodies we write. In order to decide what range to use, I base it off of whatever Melodyne detects the pitch of the sample as. Then, I use the surrounding octaves as the range. For example, Mercy was detected around F#3, so her chromatic is going to be from C2 to B4, according to Melodyne at least. FL Studio numbers notes differently from other software, so F#3 in Melodyne is actually F#4 in Newtone. This doesn't really matter in the long term because when we map out the samples, we're going to be using MIDI note numbers as opposed to note names because those are universal. And then repeat this process for the rest of the samples. The reason we're setting it up like this is so we can change the vowel being sung independently of pitch without having to pitch bend notes. Once all the tuning has been done and all the samples are consolidated, we're going to process them. This is more on the mixing side rather than the sound design side. Processing is standard fare when it comes to mixing vocals. Sometimes I really need to EQ out quite a few harsh frequencies on the full chromatic. I also add OTT at around 10 to 20% depth and play around with the bands until it sounds right. Don't throw OTT on at 100% and call it a day. It will squash the sound and make everything sound way too bright. It's one of those effects that's best used in moderation. And once all of that is done, I throw a limiter on the end just to be safe. Once you're done processing, line up the scales sequentially and export them to your project folder once you've saved it. Once you have your file exported, drag it into Reaper. Once the sample is in Reaper, ignore the beat detection pop-up and set it to whatever your tempo was in FL Studio. I'm setting it to 80 since that's what I put in FL. Next, press D to bring up Dynamic Split Item. Set it to when gate closes and play with the length and gate sliders until the silence from the chromatics grays out. Click split. It's always a good idea to double check to make sure only the silence has been cut out, but 99 times out of 100, this will be good enough. It's still better to check just in case. Once the sample has been split, press Alt plus L to open up the grid settings and set it to 1. Next, click Actions, then Show Action List, and search for Quantize. Run Quantize Items Positions to Grid. This should line up any clips that are slightly off the grid. Then, search in the Actions panel, Insert Separate. This should return only one option. Insert separate regions for each selected item. Run it. I recommend setting up keyboard shortcuts for this and all the other actions I've mentioned so far. Then go back to the Actions panel and run Quantize Items End to Grid, parentheses, change length. This just makes sure each item is actually on the same grid line. These are from the SWS pack, noted by the SWS before the command name. Now is a really good time to save your project if you haven't already. Now, double-click on a region to bring up the region editor. Click Region Manager, then make sure the number starts at R1 and click Options, then Export Regions as a CSV file. This should automatically save to your project folder. Remember to copy the path. Then, in your spreadsheet software of choice, import the CSV file. Create a new sheet tab and type in the vowel name _60 in each of the first cells of however many vowels you have. Since I have 6 vowels, I go from cell A1 to F1. Then select them all and drag copy them down to row 36 or however many notes your chromatic has. Then copy each one in order from right to left so that they are all in one column. Use Ctrl, Shift, and the arrow keys in order to make selecting things easier. Once you have them all in one column, copy that and paste it over the first cell that should have your file name in it. Then, resave the CSV. Back in Reaper, in the Region Manager, under Options, click Import Regions/Markers, parentheses, Replace Existing. You should see the region names update. Now we can loop the samples. Select the samples and trim them back so that they're a half a bar in length. Then, Control drag them down to a new track to duplicate them. Set the grid size to 1/16 and trim out the beginning of the duplicates. Then, drag them over top the end of the original samples to create a crossfade. Then, duplicate them again to the right in order to create another crossfade. Trim down the second duplicate if it overlaps with the next sample. It is extremely important that the two crossfade zones are the same audio. This is how we get a clean loop. Creating loop points is far more of an art than a science, and some loops will sound right to you but won't sound right to other people. The only real advice I can give is that if you tune the samples right, the loop point should be the same from sample to sample. Once you have a loop you're happy with, create 2 new tracks. Name them bar clip and loop clip. On the loop clip track, create a MIDI clip that is the length of the crossfade loop. Press F2 to rename it to #loop. Spelling is very, very important. Press enter once you've renamed it. Then on the bar track, create a MIDI clip that is 1 bar long. Then select them both and duplicate them across the entire range. Then select only the loop clips and insert regions for all of them. This will create a bunch of regions named #loop. When exporting, this will allow us to automatically add loop points. Then create 1 more new track and nest all the other tracks underneath it and name it Processing. Open the Effects tab and add a new container for each form of the character you have. Rename them to the form name so you can easily keep track of them. And stick a limiter on the end just in case. If you want to further process the base form samples, you can do that here. Clear the selection by pressing Escape, and under File, click Render. Set source to Region Render Matrix via Master, and set bounds to Entire Project. Under Primary Output Format, click Write BWF Chunk and set it to Markers plus Regions starting with hashtag. Next, open the Region Manager and make sure they're sorted in numerical order. Click the region marked R1, then scroll down until the first #loop region shows up. Shift-click the region ID directly before it. This should select all the named region. Then double-click under Render Track List and set it to Master Mix. Then go back to the Export menu. We don't want to export the samples directly into the project directory because that can get really messy, and if you're constantly tweaking and re-exporting samples, it can get tedious to constantly move the samples around. Duplicate the chromatic template and rename it to your character's name. I'm going with just Mercy Chromatic. Then in the samples folder, create new folders for each form of your character, and name them accordingly. If you don't have multiple forms, you can just export the samples to the sample folder. Then copy the path of your sample folder and paste it into the directory field. Then set the file name to character_form_$region. To confirm what it will look like, click the numbered file button. If everything looks good, export the samples. This may take a few minutes depending on how many samples you have. While that's going on, if you've enjoyed this video so far, give it a like and hype the video if you're on mobile. And comment what you'd like to see next. I want to branch out into more tutorial and video essay content in the future, maybe even a few library reviews like I did with Super Audio Kart 2. So if you'd like to see me make a video on a certain topic, please let me know in the comments. Anyways, the samples are done exporting. Now we can actually create a decent sampler preset. And majority of the code you'll need is in either the boilerplate DS preset file or the code snippet markdown file. Drag both of these into your code editor. In the code snippets file under the sample group header, replace the high vel and the low vel ranges with the appropriate ones for how many samples you have. Since Mercy has 6 samples, I'm pulling from the 6 sample list. Next, select the car name _vowel_1 and use find and replace to replace it with whatever the path to the samples folder is. In Mercy's case, I'm replacing it with norm_mercy_norm_ah, since that's the first one. Copy the whole thing to the DS preset file under the groups tag. Repeat this for all the vowels you have. Before adding more forms, it's a good idea to test out the chromatic first. Open up any FNF MIDI or FLP if you don't mind slide notes not working, and replace one of the characters with decent sampler and load in your file. Then select all the character notes and randomize the velocities. Some DAWs call it humanize. Regardless, make sure it covers the whole velocity range. Except if it goes down to 0. If it does that, bring them up ever so slightly because Decent Sampler won't play any notes if the velocity is 0. So you want your minimum velocity to be at least 1. Then play the song. You should hear it sounding like a normal FNF cover. If not, compare it against Mercy's chromatic to see if there's anything different that shouldn't be. Once you're happy with how it sounds, we can add in the other forms. Back in Reaper, open up one of the form change containers and start adding effects. Be sure to avoid any time-based effects here because it will screw up the loop. These include chorus, delay, reverb, phasing, and flanging, as well as certain pitch shift algorithms. Once you're happy with the effects, click Render and change the form name in the sample and path to the new form. Then render it out. Thankfully, you don't need to redo the region mapping. Now we can set up the key switches. You can skip this step if you want and just have each form in its own DS preset file, but I like having all the forms in one file where I can change to them at a moment's notice. Back in your code editor, copy the note tag from the code snippets and paste it under the MIDI tag in the main DS preset file. The reason it's labeled 24 is not because it's my favorite number, but because that's the note number that maps to the kick drum on the general MIDI formatting. Duplicate the binding for however many groups you have. For example, Mercy has 6 groups per form, so it gets copied 17 times. Increment the position value each time you duplicate. I recommend adding empty lines between forms and a comment denoting each form. On the other form groups, set the translation values to false. It should look like this. Then, duplicate the note tag for each form you have. Increment the note number each time you do. Change which form has a true translation value based on which form the key switch belongs to. Now that we have a fully working DS preset file, we can finally make things look good. Copy the keyboard tag from the code snippets and paste it under the UI tag. Then set the play range high note to 60 plus whatever your chromatic's range is, and set the key range high note to the highest note number from your keyform switches. Now pick out appropriate colors for the ranges and paste in the hex codes. Now it's time to add a background image to our chromatic. Pick out an image of your character or cobble something together really quickly. It can technically be any size, but the default is 812 pixels wide by 375 pixels tall. Regardless, once you're finished, export it into the image folder and back in the Decent Sampler file, change the name of the image to whatever you exported the background as, including the extension. Now, all that's left to do is to make sure it both sounds and looks good. You aren't happy with one form or another, you just need to change the effects and re-export the samples. Just be sure to close down whatever project that has the chromatic loaded in before you re-export, or else Reaper won't allow you to render over it. And now you have your own fully working FNF chromatic that will work in almost any DAW. I thank you all so much for watching. Huge shout out to the Supporter Plus members scrolling across the screen right now. If you want to see your name in the credits as well as see behind the scenes videos and photos, you can join my channel membership. But if not, thank you for watching and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye!